Hey guys, this is Toronto is Broken, and yeah, my latest single, In Your Soul and Care For You, is out now, and it's the first release on my debut on my own label called Yana Music, a little output for my own material. So what I thought I'd do is show you how I went about creating the bass sound in the lead track of the single, In Your Soul. So here is the project. It's not a massive one compared to what I'm normally used to. It's fairly straight to the point, and yeah, so let me just play through the intro to the drop so you can hear it for yourself.
It's every time I see you, it's every time you call, and there's everything about you makes no sense at all. Nah, no, baby, I don't mind at all. Nah, no, baby, you help me through it all. And love can find the answer, and love can help us all. And love can be the answer, oh, feel it in your soul. And love can find the answer, and love can help us all. And love can be the answer. And love can be the answer.
Right, so the part that I'm going to walk you through how to make is the bass line here. So as you can tell, it's quite a acidy kind of bass line, and it's just worth noting that the order these plugins are in place wasn't the order I actually assembled it. It's mainly from experimentation. It's a sound that I made quite a while ago, and I've tried to get it to work in several different projects, but with this one it's kind of fit into place. But I feel like it's quite a versatile sound to work with as well. So the intro is quite old schooly with the big pianos and kind of ravey chords, old kind of soulful kind of pitched vocal, and very reminiscent of the old school kind of hardcore kind of feel of it. And yeah, to throw in some more hardcore elements, I went for this kind of acid bass line. So the bass made of two components. We've got the sub down here, which is basically just a pure sine wave, near enough I believe. Yeah, it's just a pure sine wave here, fairly standard. Anyone really who knows how to make drum and bass, it's just a sine wave, just a bit of pitch automation at the start, running throughout, dropping it down to semitones, so you get a kind of transient, bit like a kick on there, and then it's filtered out, sidechained and whatnot. Made sure it's in mono, even though it should be, but just to be safe. But the main body of the sound is this. So it's actually made of two components. Originally it was made from one. So you see you've got the side here and the mono. These are pretty much the same sound with just some slight tweaks. So when I first made the sound, it was really nice and wide, but then when you put it down in mono, where it's just going to play out of one speaker, typically in a fairly standard club system, it kind of loses its weight because of the phase cancellation going on, and that's not something you want. You don't want it to build up and then it drops and there's no bass line basically, and just drums. So yeah, if we listen to so if we go through, so I started off with the side, and then once I'd done that, I took the same, copied it down, took off some of the effects, and kind of made it a more mono version, which was fairly straightforward to do. So if I just turn everything off, and we are left with this sound. it's a fairly pants sound. It's pretty weak. You could use it as a nice kind of click at the start. Could be good for like some kind of melodic arpeggio in there. But as you can tell, it's already got that kind of resonancy, kind of raspiness from an acid bass line. So if I turn these things off, we start off with just this scrapyard waveform here, which you can't really hear anything. Yeah. So that's the sound. That would have been from playing around with lots of different waveforms. I wouldn't have made that sound and be like, yeah, do you know what I could do with this little click? Then what I would have done, put some feedback on it. Still doesn't really do much. And then some modulation. So you can hear quietly like a little bit of a womp. Modulation of the phase oscillator is basically an FM oscillator. Some white noise, which you can't really hear, but it kind of comes into play later on. So this is very typical of how I make certain sounds. So I will start off with something simple like a sine wave, and a lot of it comes from the filters here. So we've got a band pass, and we've got a double notch. So if you listen really carefully, I suggest you have headphones on for this. You can hear a little bit of what it's doing, but the main body of the sound, the tone, also worth noticing, it's got unison of 3, it's slightly detuned, and it's widened as well, and it's got a macro assigned to it, so as it goes throughout the track I can accent certain notes by making it wider in the stereo field. The main body sound comes from these distortions, so if I turn them on one at a time, so we've got a parabolic shaper, sine shaper, tube, and then we've got a phaser, just to kind of add to that kind of side, make it a bit wider, give it a bit more movement, some character, some flavor. But what I will often do, I will just slap this Ableton native amp plugin, and I just love the distortions in here. I wouldn't recommend using it for guitars. Well, I've tried to use it on guitars, and I had many good results. But if we turn this on, so even if I think it might not be this sound, but if I think of a sound and I've got like, yeah, this is pretty cool, I will always throw in an amp distortion, and sometimes just on the default preset, I will make sure it's set to, it's normally mono, set it to dual, so it keeps the stereo, and just see what happens. After this step, it comes into kind of tidying it up. So I've used a mid-side mode, so I can mix EQ the stereo image separate to the mono. So in the mono, I just kind of boosted around here, just to kind of get some of that bite out. And then on the side, I have obviously rolled off a low end up to about 140, and then emphasized similar frequencies to where I've boosted it mono. Also, you notice there's a little curve here. What I always like to do, I like to try and make my side, if I am boosting something, I would like to maybe do it in a slightly different area, because that again increases the stereo image of the width of it and the interest of it. Got a chorus, kind of softens the sound a bit. Overdrive, as you can see, there's pretty much on the default setting. I just chose an EQ area and really reduced the dry to wet, so it's 9%, so it's not doing much. Never Ableton amp. So this is really giving that kind of some like warm fuzz. Then an OTT compressor just to squash it, and then I've kind of brought things back, but it's only on about 40%. So that's more to boost, keep the sustain in check. Now if I go to this mono version, if we look at the Ableton preset, it's pretty much exactly the same, apart from maybe I've changed this wavetable position here. But the bandpass, double notch, yeah, they're all in a similar place. I forgot to mention, but there are kind of like, to kind of get this shape of sound, there is an envelope on the notch to kind of make it more like a kind of pluck sound. And I've also attached that same envelope to the amplitude over here, so the volume, well, the level of the overall sound is kind of mirroring what the filter shape is doing. So as the filter goes down, it gets quieter as well to give it more of a pluck. And again, I've just so not as drastic as before. This is more like a supporting element in there, because if I so I've bussed them both to a track called, it's called MS bass, mid-side bass, some compressor, and just a limiter that's, if you see, is basically just catching the very start, just so it doesn't go crazy. I very rarely use like a limiter like this. It's just a safety precaution, really. But if I go to the utility and I solo this, set it to mono, don't really like how it sounds. But if I get both, it's got a lot more body to it now because we've introduced this. Yeah, it's got some girth to it. Finally, this goes into a bass mix. So all of my different mid-range basses will be in this bass mix group, where I have fairly standard, the same kind of processing going on. So a limiter again, just to catch stuff at the end, even though the Camel Fat and the Vintage Warmer will work as limiters, but as soon as you stick any form of EQing or filtering on afterwards, it will start to potentially peak again. So it's just good to have those in place. So if I go through the PSP Vintage Warmer, this is great. Big ups King U for years ago giving me this heads up. But if you use these light, semi and heavy driven tape presets on your bass bus, it just helps gel everything together and it isn't too overbearing. So if I turn it off, so just gives it a bit more girth basically. And yeah, another mid-side EQ again, just to be safe. You can never be too safe. I've kind of toned down the stereo in the lower mid and below frequencies, and here I've dropped this because this is going to be kind of where the kick comes through. Even though there's side chaining, I still don't want it to be any chance of it fighting for shape. I've got a filter here, which is just doing a filter sweep at the end. That's not playing because it's got a bit of, and you can see the resonance as well, so it gives that acidy sounds are really resonant sounds, and it's when distortion peaks before a distortion, like harsh peaks, have a major impact to the sound. So if I was to boost something, try and do it before a distortion because it can change the tone of the sound. If I was to duck something, if I was to scoop something out, I'd maybe do it afterwards. It's more of a cleanup process. So these are more kind of tonal things. And yeah, what I did notice, if you see here, the resonance increases as it goes down, because I don't want, if I didn't have that, the resonant peak would be constant all the way throughout the top. So if you looked at a frequency analyzer, you'd have like a little bump here, which is not always ideal and you don't really want. But to get that kind of like French disco-y, acidy, Pioneer filter kind of sound, you want like a high resonance. Then you got a Camel Fat here afterwards. This is really good for, I always use this to do a final low cut. Again, you can never have too many low cuts. And it also works as a soft clipper. So it limits it, it cuts it at 0, but you don't hear that kind of pumping sound. And this is really good as well for doing filter sweeps, like if you filter something out or filter something up or high pass something out, and it doesn't play and if you turn the resonant all the way down, it's a nice, really clean one, and you don't get that. Sometimes you don't want that resonant-y kind of filter sweep sound. After here, we've got an audio rack, which is doing a parallel thing. So the main body is being sidechained by a kick, but then I've got a quieter duplicate of it where I'm just boosting some of the mids here. So if we listen, then play this, because I still want some of this area to come through. Obviously this kick is ducking the whole signal, but I don't want it all the way gone, and I still want some of this body coming through, because I think I've got a bit of a dip here around the kick to accommodate for that space. Finally, what I'll do, I'll route my bass mix and my sub mix into a BS mix, which is just bass and sub. This is a final little kind of notch here around between the kick, 100 hertz for the kick and a typical 200 hertz for the snare. I kind of keep that, tend to do a little dip here. I've got some track spacers on here which are side chaining, but they side chain certain frequencies. So one will be for the kick, one will be for the snare. So kicks, yeah, so this one's the kick and this one's the snare. And it's nice to have those controlled separately. And apart from that, that is pretty much the sound. Like in this instance, it's literally just one bass patch. And that is it. Has the sub got anything on it? No, the sub's literally is just a pure tone sine wave. It's low passed as well. Even though a sine is purely just one pure frequency, sometimes you will get artifacts. You might not hear them or really see them, but they might still have impact on your mix and do some weird things. So it's always just a cut. You don't need those frequencies anyway. It's not producing those frequencies, so it's not going to hurt to just cut them out. So yeah, in the mix, it sounds like this. So yeah, let me know if you've got any questions about this. Make sure to comment on wherever you're seeing this video, be it on Facebook or whatever. Drop a comment down if you want to know some more. Any suggestions for what we want to look at next? Might tie into our next release on the label in a couple of months. And yep, hope this was helpful. Hope you picked something up, or maybe it's just some. It's just nice to see how other people do things sometimes. So, yeah, make sure you give this a share. And our new single, "In Your Soul," and "Care for You," is out now everywhere: Spotify, Beatport, Juno, Apple Music, iTunes, wherever you want to get it from. And yeah, hope you enjoy.